It was almost midnight when the lights in the Ward mansion finally dimmed. The city outside still pulsed, the skyline a constellation of ambition and exhaustion. But inside the 20,000-square-foot home, peace was nowhere to be found. Cries echoed down the marble hallway. Not one voice, but 7 tiny, overlapping wails from the nursery upstairs. The household staff had already thinned to half its usual number. 2 maids had quit that morning. A third had left a note saying, "I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore." And somewhere in the middle of it all stood Steve M. Ward, billionaire, CEO of Ward Technologies, a man whose name graced Forbes covers and corporate halls. But at that moment, barefoot, hair disheveled, shirt half-buttoned, he didn't look like power. He looked like chaos pretending to have control. He muttered under his breath, "Where's the new nanny?" "Gone," said one of the housekeepers quietly, clutching a blanket. "She left an hour ago," Steve M. turned sharply. "Gone?" "She started yesterday. She said she wasn't being paid enough to handle the screaming." He laughed bitterly. "She's right." He rubbed his temples. 7 daughters under the age of 3. 5 born in one impossible pregnancy, 2 in the next. The odds alone had made headlines. The Ward miracle, the newspapers had called it. But miracles lose their shine when sleepless nights stretch into years. Down the hall, his wife Clara lay in the dim light of their bedroom, her face pale, her body fragile. Complications from her second pregnancy had left her weak, her heart unstable, and her spirit drained. When Steve M. entered, she opened her eyes slightly. "Are they still crying?" "Yes," he said flatly. She sighed, her voice barely a whisper. "They need you. They need someone qualified," he snapped. Not a father trying to balance a Fortune 500 company and a daycare. Her eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. He hated himself for the words as soon as they left his mouth. He sat on the edge of the bed, exhaling. "I'm sorry, Clara, I don't know how to do this anymore. You hire people, and they leave," she murmured. "You fire them, and they leave faster. Maybe the problem isn't them." The sentence landed like a weight on his chest. He stood, unable to face her gaze. "Get some rest," he said, leaving before she could answer. By morning, headlines were waiting for him. Ward Technologies announces record quarter. CEO Steve M. Ward expands into global AI sector. The man who never sleeps. He smiled for the cameras, shook hands, signed deals. Every gesture rehearsed, every word measured. No one would guess that the man being hailed as a visionary had spent the night cleaning baby bottles and pacing nursery floors. At noon, he took his usual route to the private restaurant near the office, his 1 hour of silence before the chaos resumed. The valet opened his car door. He stepped out, sunglasses on, phone in hand, mind already racing through the next meeting. That's when a voice interrupted him. "Sir, would you like one?" He looked up. A young woman stood by the sidewalk, holding out a small folded paper. She wore a faded coat, her brown hair pulled into a loose bun. Her eyes, though tired, were bright, the kind that didn't just look at you, but into you. "What is it?" he asked curtly. "A verse," she said simply. "Just words of hope." He nearly waved her off. He didn't have time for this. But something in her tone, the calm, the unshakable peace, made him pause. He took the note reluctantly. "You giving these to everyone?" She smiled. "Just the ones who look like they forgot they need it." He blinked, unsure how to respond. When he looked down to read, she was already walking away. The paper read, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. He frowned, folding it back carefully. Weary and burdened. The words hit too close. He shoved the note into his pocket, convincing himself it meant nothing. That night, another nanny left. This one had lasted 2 days, a record apparently. The children were restless, the twins feverish, the house an orchestra of cries. At 3 a.m., Stephen sat in his office, the glow of city lights flickering against the glass wall. He stared at the note again. He thought of the woman, her calm in the storm of the street. He wondered who she was, why she'd spoken to him that way. Why, for the first time in months, he couldn't shake off someone's voice. He opened his laptop and typed into the search bar, Matthew 11:28 meaning. Dozens of pages appeared. Sermons, devotionals, videos. He clicked one randomly. A pastor's voice filled the room. Rest isn't the absence of work. It's the presence of peace. You can build empires and still be empty inside. You can have everything except quiet. He closed the screen abruptly, heart pounding. He wasn't a religious man. He didn't even believe in quiet. But that night, when the cries of his daughters echoed again, he found himself whispering, "Peace, please." 2 days later, he saw her again. He was leaving his office early for once, tie loosened, exhaustion written on his face. There she was, outside the same restaurant, handing out the same notes to strangers, unnoticed, unbothered, unafraid. He approached her. "You do this every day?" She turned, surprised. "I do, until I run out of papers." "What do you get out of it?" She smiled softly. "It's not what I get. It's what I give." He exhaled, unsure whether to laugh or envy her. "I'm Steve M. Ward," he said finally, extending his hand. "I know," she replied calmly. "I read the papers sometimes," he frowned. "You don't sound impressed." "I'm not supposed to be." Her tone wasn't rude, just honest. Something stirred inside him, a mix of irritation and curiosity. He hesitated before asking, "What's your name?" "Grace," she said. "Grace Miller." The name felt ironic, poetic, dangerous. "Grace," he repeated quietly. "Do you need a job?" She blinked, startled. "A job?" "I've gone through 21 nannies," he said dryly. "I don't know why I'm saying this, but maybe you're the piece they all needed." She laughed softly. "I'm not a nanny, Mr. Ward." "Neither are any of the people who keep quitting," he muttered. Her gaze softened. "I don't know much about money or big houses, sir, but I do know about love and patience and prayer." He stared at her, this woman with nothing, speaking like she had everything. "Come by tomorrow," he said finally. "Just meet my wife. If you still want to run after that, I'll understand." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right." Tomorrow. The next day, Grace Miller stepped into the Ward mansion. It was breathtaking and heartbreaking. The polished marble, the grand staircase, the faint scent of perfume mixed with baby formula and exhaustion. She could feel the tension in the air like static. The twins were crying in one room, the older toddlers in another. Maids moved like ghosts, avoiding eye contact. She found Clara in bed, frail but beautiful, eyes dull from fatigue. When Grace introduced herself, Clara looked puzzled. "You're the new nanny?" Grace smiled gently. "Just someone who wants to help." Clara studied her face, sensing sincerity. "You'll be gone in 2 days," she murmured. "Everyone leaves." Grace sat beside her, folding her hands. "Then maybe I'll try to stay 3. That made Clara laugh softly, the first genuine sound of warmth the house had heard in months. When Stephen returned home that evening, he froze at the doorway. The mansion, for once, was quiet. The babies were asleep. The house smelled faintly of lavender. A soft hymn played from somewhere upstairs. He followed the sound to the nursery. Grace sat in her rocking chair, a baby in each arm, humming an old church song. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. He didn't say a word, just watched. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like a stranger. He found her later in the kitchen, cleaning bottles. "You're still here," he said. She smiled. "You asked me to help, and you did the impossible." Grace shrugged. "Nothing's impossible when you stop fighting everything." He studied her, the calm face, the humble poise, the way she didn't seem intimidated by wealth or titles. Something in him shifted, subtly, quietly, like the first light before dawn. "Can I ask," he said, "why you gave me that note in the first place?" She wiped her hands and looked up. "Because you looked like a man carrying the whole world, but forgetting who could carry him." He swallowed hard, unable to respond. As she left the room, he found himself whispering the word again, testing its weight. Grace. And for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, he didn't feel entirely alone. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling across the living room like a quiet mercy. The mansion no longer felt lifeless. It breathed, hesitantly, as if testing what peace could sound like. Grace stood barefoot in the nursery, her voice soft as she hummed an old hymn. The babies, once restless, seemed to respond to the rhythm of her calm. She didn't rush, didn't command. She moved with the gentle patience of someone who had learned to listen more than she spoke. When Stephen appeared in the doorway, still half in disbelief that she had returned, he said nothing at first. He simply watched. For the first time in months, his daughters were quiet. Grace looked up. "You're early," she said, smiling. "I couldn't sleep," he replied. "That's new." She smiled again, but didn't answer. Instead, she turned her attention back to the babies, whispering something under her breath, a prayer he couldn't quite catch. Later that morning, Clara joined them, supported by a nurse. Her health was improving, if only slightly. She sat by the window, watching Grace weave sunlight and stillness into the chaos that used to fill the room. "She's different," Clara said quietly when Stephen came to check on her. "She's not trained," he replied. "That's what makes her different," Clara said. "She doesn't try to control the girls. She just loves them." He crossed his arms, uneasy. "Love doesn't keep a household running." "No," Clara said, eyes soft but sharp. "But it keeps a family alive." The words hit him harder than he wanted to admit. Grace began to work from dawn until the stars appeared. She didn't complain, she sang. Simple songs that filled the halls with a peace no paycheck had ever bought. Each of the 7 little girls responded differently to her. Emma, the oldest, followed her everywhere. June, the smallest, clung to her sleeve as she moved. The twins, Hope and Hazel, giggled whenever she prayed aloud, thinking she was telling stories. One evening, as she bathed them, Clara watched from the doorway. "You make it look easy," Grace laughed softly. "It's not. But I learned something long ago. You can't fix noise with more noise." Clara tilted her head. "What do you fix it with then?" "Peace," Grace said simply. "And prayer." By the second week, even the staff began to change. The housekeepers who once walked on eggshells now lingered a little longer, drawn to Grace's warmth. The chef stopped muttering complaints and started bringing small desserts for the girls. One evening, as Grace read bedtime stories, she asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "Princesses," Emma shouted. "Doctors," Hazel giggled. "Like Miss Grace," June said with absolute certainty. Grace's smile faltered, touched. "Oh, sweetheart, you'll be much greater than me." Behind the door, Clara pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a sob. Stephen tried to ignore the shift, tried to keep his focus on work, quarterly reports, expansion deals, board meetings, but he couldn't ignore the quiet anymore. He started coming home early, not because he wanted to, but because something drew him back, curiosity, confusion, maybe longing. He'd find Grace sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by his daughters, reading from an old, worn Bible. Once, he interrupted. "Do you really think those words help?" Grace didn't look up. "They helped me," he scoffed. "That's not an answer." She closed the book gently. "No, Mr. Ward, that's faith." Her calm irritated him. People usually feared him, deferred, flattered, obeyed. She did none of those things. It wasn't long before he tried to test her patience. During dinner one night, he asked abruptly, Tell me, Grace, what do you pray for when you're in this house? She didn't hesitate. That you'd find rest. He raised an eyebrow. You think I'm restless? I think you're running from silence, she said. Because silence might tell you the truth. The air between them went still. Clara's fork paused mid-air. He forced a laugh, but his chest felt heavy. You talk like a pastor. Grace smiled faintly. I just listened to one. And then she turned her focus back to feeding the children, as if the conversation had never happened. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Steve M. found himself standing alone in his office, staring at the verse she'd once given him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. He closed his eyes and whispered, I don't know how. The next morning, Clara found him sitting on the nursery floor, tie loosened, foam forgotten, holding one of the twins in his arms. She didn't interrupt. She just watched, tears in her eyes. Grace, standing at the doorway, saw it too. The man of steel finally bending without breaking. But peace rarely enters without resistance. One afternoon, Grace was singing softly while folding laundry when the front door slammed. Stephen's voice boomed down the hall. Who told the press about you? She froze. What? He threw a newspaper onto the table. The headline read, Tech Tycoon hires street preacher as nanny, desperation or redemption. Grace's face fell. I didn't. I have shareholders calling me Grace. Clients questioning my judgment. You were supposed to bring order, not headlines. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed calm. I didn't tell anyone. I don't need attention, Mr. Ward. I only wanted to serve. Serve? He laughed bitterly. You think this is a church? This is a corporation, a brand. My name isn't the only one that matters, she interrupted gently. He stopped cold. No one had ever cut him off like that. The girls don't care about your brand, Grace continued softly. They just want their father. The silence that followed was heavier than anger. Finally he turned away, voice low. You can go. I'll send your pay. She nodded slowly, pain flickering behind her calm. I'll pack my things after the girls fall asleep. They shouldn't see another person leave, and she did. Quietly, without goodbye. The next 2 days felt like stepping backward in time. The house grew restless again. The girls cried for Miss Grace. Clara's condition worsened under the weight of stress and sadness. On the third night, a storm broke over Manhattan, wind howling, thunder shaking the windows. Stephen paced in his office, unable to concentrate, unable to sleep. Then he heard it, crying, not from the nursery, from outside. He ran to the front gate. Through sheets of rain, he saw Grace kneeling in the street beside a small shape. June, one of the twins, soaked and shivering. She had wandered out through the unlocked side door. Grace had been walking home from church when she spotted her near the curb. Stephen froze. For a moment, guilt and relief collided like lightning. He rushed forward, grabbing his daughter, his voice cracking. June, oh my God. Grace looked up, drenched, eyes full of compassion but no blame. She's all right. She just got scared. He held his child tight, trembling. Then, without thinking, he turned to Grace and pulled her up from the rain. What were you doing out here? Delivering dinner to the shelter, she said simply. And I guess I was sent here instead. He stared at her, the woman he'd fired, soaked to the bone, holding his child as if she were her own. And something inside him broke cleanly. Grace, he said quietly, voice trembling. Please come back. She hesitated. If I do, things have to change. He nodded. They already have. When they entered the house, Clara was waiting at the stairs, tears streaming down her face as she saw her daughter safe. Grace helped dry the baby, humming softly, and Clara fell to her knees beside her. I prayed for help, she whispered. And God sent you. Grace smiled, exhausted but peaceful. He always sends what we need, not what we expect. Stephen looked at her, the weight of years of arrogance pressing down on him. He finally said the words that had been locked inside him for too long. "I've built companies," he said softly. "But I never built a home." Grace looked up. "Then let's start tonight." By the next morning, the Ward mansion was transformed. Not in structure, in spirit. There were no grand declarations, no sudden miracles. Just warmth returning in small, steady ways. Stephen sat with his daughters during breakfast. Clara smiled again, faintly but sincerely. Grace didn't preach. She didn't push. She simply was. And in her quiet presence, something sacred had finally taken root. Not religion, but peace. The days after the storm felt like spring after a long winter. It wasn't just the weather. Something invisible had shifted inside the Ward mansion. The air that once carried tension now held laughter. The walls that echoed with cries now vibrated with the sound of little feet chasing each other down the hall. Grace's return hadn't been loud. She had simply walked back in, soft voice, humble steps, sleeves rolled up. And without announcing it, she had taken her place not as an employee, but as the pulse of the home. Clara recovered faster than doctors had expected. Her heart condition stabilized. Her smile returned. The girls began sleeping through the night. Even the maids, once resigned to silence, started talking and smiling again. But the real change was harder to measure. It was in the way Stephen came home, earlier, slower, as if unwilling to miss a moment. He started small. He read bedtime stories, awkwardly at first, stumbling over children's books with boardroom diction. He learned how to braid hair badly, how to tie ribbons clumsily, how to be laughed at without feeling mocked. Grace guided him without commanding. "They don't need you to be perfect," she said once, after he'd burned pancakes on a Saturday morning. "They just need to know you're trying." He looked at her, covered in flour, and laughed. A real, unguarded laugh that startled even him. Grace's quiet faith began to reach Clara too. One afternoon, Clara found her sitting by the window, whispering verses while sewing a torn blanket. "Why do you still pray?" Clara asked. "You've already been through enough." Grace looked up, smiling gently. "That's why I still pray. Because I made it through." Clara hesitated, then said softly, "I used to pray when I was young. Before the success, before the fear." Grace nodded. "God didn't stop listening. Maybe you just stopped talking." Those words stayed with Clara for days. She began to keep a small Bible on her nightstand again. At night, when Stephen thought she was sleeping, she would whisper prayers for him. As the home found rhythm, the world outside began to notice. For months, tabloids had painted Stephen Ward as a tyrant in designer suits, the CEO who fired nannies like emails. But now, a different kind of story leaked. Neighbors whispered that the Ward's mansion, once a fortress of luxury, had become a place of kindness. People said they saw Grace handing out meals from the front gate on weekends, the billionaire himself helping load boxes into trucks for the local shelter. At first, Stephen denied it to his team. "It's just one day," he said. But that one day turned into every Saturday. He would stand beside Grace at the soup kitchen, wearing old jeans and an apologetic smile, serving stew to men who didn't know who he was and didn't care. One afternoon, a volunteer recognized him and asked, "Aren't you the tech guy? What are you doing here?" Stephen hesitated, then looked over at Grace ladling soup. "Learning," he said. But redemption never comes without test. A few weeks later, a journalist ambushed him outside the shelter. "Mr. Ward, how does it feel to have your charity maid fixing your public image?" The words stung. That night, Stephen sat in his study, staring at the article headline, "From Scandal to Salvation, the CEO and his street maid." It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. He felt anger rising, not at Grace, but at how fragile his ego still was. He looked out the window, saw her in the yard teaching his daughters how to plant flowers. The scene was pure, untouched by cameras or applause. He realized with quiet humiliation that she wasn't the one chasing attention. he was still the one running from humility. Later that evening, he found her in the kitchen. "Why didn't you tell me about the article?" he asked. "I saw it," she said calmly. "But it doesn't change who we are. It changes how people see me." Grace tilted her head. "Why do you still care so much about that?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "You built a world that rewards power," she said softly. "But your daughters will grow up in a world that rewards love. You decide which one they'll learn from you." Her words stripped him bare. He leaned against the counter, voice low. "You make it sound easy. It's not," she said. "That's why Grace exists." The next morning, Clara joined them for breakfast, the first time she'd come downstairs in months. The girls clapped and cheered. Grace had baked muffins, and Clara laughed when the smallest one smeared chocolate on her robe. Stephen looked around the table and realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about deals, deadlines, or dividends. He was just there. After breakfast, Clara took his hand. "She changed everything," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "She changed me." Grace's faith spread through small, contagious acts. She organized story time every evening, but her stories were never preachy. They were simple parables dressed in warmth. One night she said, "A seed only grows when it stops being just a seed." Sometimes breaking is the beginning. Clara squeezed Stephen's hand as he listened from the doorway. He knew she wasn't talking about seeds. Months passed. The company board started noticing his absence at late meetings. Investors complained. The press speculated, but profits didn't fall, they grew. His employees said the new culture felt human. The once feared CEO had begun speaking differently in interviews. He talked about purpose instead of power, about people instead of performance. When asked what caused his shift, he smiled faintly and said, "Someone reminded me what peace looks like." He never mentioned her name. But those who had seen Grace at the mansion didn't need him to. One Sunday morning, the Wards attended church together for the first time. Grace sat beside them, singing softly. The congregation turned to whisper, the billionaire family sitting among factory workers and waitresses. Stephen's daughters clapped to the music, their laughter echoing through the old wooden pews. After service, the pastor approached him. "Mr. Ward, it's been a long time since I've seen you here." Stephen smiled. "I didn't come for me. I came because someone else wouldn't stop praying I'd show up." The pastor chuckled. "She must have prayed hard." He looked at Grace, who was helping the girls pick flowers by the church door. "She did," he said. "And it worked. But life, as Grace often said, has a way of testing lessons learned." One night, Clara fell ill again, her heart racing, her breathing shallow. The panic that once ruled the mansion returned instantly. Stephen froze for a split second, the old fear clawing back. But Grace stepped forward, calm and sure, taking control until the ambulance arrived. At the hospital, as machines beeped and doctors rushed, she placed a hand on Stephen's shoulder. "Pray," she whispered. He shook his head. "I don't know how." "Then just talk to him like you talked to me." So he did, awkwardly, trembling, desperate. And for the first time in his life, the prayer wasn't about money, control, or outcomes. It was about surrender. Hours later, the doctor emerged. "She's stable. She need rest, but she be fine." Stephen exhaled, collapsing into the chair beside Grace. "Do you believe now?" she asked gently. He looked at her, tears running down his face. "I think I finally stopped fighting what I already knew." Clara's recovery this time was slow, but it was different. There was gratitude in every breath. Stephen stayed by her side, reading to her, feeding her, doing the things he used to pay others for. One afternoon, as Grace brought soup to the room, Clara smiled. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think angels had wings." Grace laughed quietly. "They do. You just can't always see them." Clara looked at her, eyes glistening. "Ours wears an apron." By the time spring came, The Ward home was no longer famous for its wealth, but for its warmth. Stephen began funding shelters anonymously. He opened a foundation for single mothers, naming it the Grace Home Initiative. When asked by reporters why he'd chosen that name, he only said, "Because Grace found me first." Grace never sought credit. She still took the bus to church every Sunday, still handed out little folded verses on the street. But now, people recognized her, the woman whose quiet faith had tamed a millionaire's mansion. Sometimes, as she left the church, she'd find Stephen's car waiting at the curb, the girls waving from the back seat. "We're here for story time," they'd shout. And every time she'd smile, because she knew what they really meant. They weren't coming for stories, they were coming for home. Years later, the Ward mansion no longer felt like a fortress of wealth. It had become something rarer, a home of light. The marble floors that once echoed with loneliness were now scratched by little shoes, laughter, and the small chaos that meant life was being lived honestly. The 7 daughters were no longer babies. Emma and Hazel were nearly teenagers now, full of opinions and curiosity. The younger twins still followed Grace around, even though they were tall enough to look her in the eyes. Grace never stopped working, though work was no longer the word for what she did. She had become part of the family, though she still refused the word family when people asked. "They saved me as much as I helped them," she'd say. One quiet morning, as sunlight spilled through the open kitchen, Stephen walked in, wearing no suit, just an old sweater and a contented look that would have been unrecognizable years earlier. "Coffee?" Grace asked with her usual gentle tone. He smiled. "You read my mind." The two shared a peaceful silence, something that used to be impossible in this house. After a while, he said, they accepted the foundation's expansion. "Grace Haven will open in 3 more cities." She paused, eyes softening. "You didn't need to name it that." "I didn't," he said. "Clara did." Grace smiled faintly, eyes glimmering. "She always did have better ideas than you," he laughed. "Still does." Clara entered then, healthy and radiant, a soft scarf around her neck. She walked slowly but with grace, the kind that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with peace. "Did I hear my name?" she asked, her tone teasing. "Only good things," Grace said, setting down a tray of muffins. Clara took her hand and squeezed it. "You've turned my husband into a human being. For that, you deserve sainthood," Stephen chuckled. "Or hazard pay," but Grace only smiled. "All I did was remind him of what he already had." That afternoon, as the family gathered for lunch, the girls filled the air with conversation. Emma talked about a debate competition. Hazel had drawn a comic about their father being a superhero in a suit. Stephen laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. Grace watched quietly, her heart swelling at the sight. Clara caught her gaze. "You should have sat with us at the table years ago." Grace shook her head. "You needed to find your own way first." "And you?" Clara asked softly. Grace smiled. "I was found the moment I walked through that door." In the years that followed, the world outside began to change too. Stephen's company evolved, no longer just about technology, but about people. He introduced maternity programs, funded scholarships for single mothers, and gave paid leave for fathers who wanted to be present. When journalists asked what caused his transformation, he would always answer the same way. "I used to think innovation changed the world. Then I met someone who changed hearts, and realized that's where real revolutions begin." He never said Grace's last name on record. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. One snowy December evening, the mansion hosted something new, a Christmas service. Neighbors, employees, and even strangers from the shelter came. The grand living room glowed with candles, children singing softly under a garland-wrapped staircase. Grace stood near the piano, helping the girls with the carols. When the song ended, Clara took the microphone. She glanced at Grace, smiling. "Years ago, I almost lost everything, my health, my family, my faith. But then, God sent us someone who didn't heal us with medicine or money, but with prayer, patience, and presence. She turned toward Grace. This home once hired 21 nannies. None stayed. But one woman, found on the street with nothing but faith, taught us that love doesn't need a resume. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Clara continued, voice trembling. You didn't just save our daughters. You saved us. The room fell silent. Then, slowly, applause rose, soft at first, then stronger, echoing through marble and memory alike. Grace stood frozen, overwhelmed, until the girls rushed up and hugged her all at once. Miss Grace, Emma whispered, you're our home. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the candles burned low, Grace walked outside into the crisp air. Snowflakes drifted like whispers from heaven. Stephen joined her, holding 2 cups of cocoa. You know, he said, handing her one, I used to think wealth meant never needing help. And now? She asked. He looked up at the stars. Now I think wealth is measured by how much peace you leave behind, she smiled. That's a good definition. He turned to her. It's yours. They stood in silence, the night calm and sacred. After a while, he asked, do you ever miss the old life? The church work, the streets? She thought for a moment. No, she said softly, because it's all the same work. Whether it's a mansion or a shelter, people just need love and someone willing to bring it. He nodded slowly. Then stay as long as you want, she smiled. I was never planning to leave. The following spring, tragedy struck quietly, as life tends to do. Grace fell ill, nothing dramatic at first. A persistent cough, fatigue. Doctors said it was pneumonia, treatable, but complications arose. Despite medication and rest, her strength faded. Clara and the girls took turns caring for her. Stephen never left her side. One night, as she rested in the guest room overlooking the garden, she said softly, you don't need to be sad. You already learned everything I came to teach. Stephen's voice broke. Don't say that. We still need you. She smiled faintly. No, Stephen. You needed God. You just met him through me. He covered his face, silent tears falling. Grace reached for his hand. Promise me something. Anything. Keep giving. Not just money, peace. Every time you help someone, remind them they matter. He nodded, unable to speak. Then she whispered, you have 7 little girls. Teach them that faith isn't a word, it's a life. He bowed his head beside her, praying the only prayer he knew. Gratitude and grief mingled together. By dawn, Grace was gone. Her funeral wasn't extravagant. She wouldn't have wanted that. It was simple, open air, held at the same church where she once handed verses to strangers. Hundreds came, people she had fed, comforted, prayed for. The 7 daughters sang her favorite hymn, Amazing Grace. When they finished, Clara stepped forward, voice trembling but steady. She didn't just work in our home. She lived in our hearts. She taught us that miracles don't always wear halos. Sometimes they wear aprons. Stephen placed a folded paper on her coffin, the same one she had handed him years ago. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. He whispered, you gave me rest. Years later, her legacy endured everywhere. The Grace Haven Foundation grew across the country, shelters, schools, and mentorship programs for women rebuilding their lives. Each site displayed her handwritten motto, you can't fix noise with more noise. Bring peace, always. Stephen retired early, devoting his time to the foundation. The girls grew into strong, grounded women, teachers, counselors, and mothers themselves. Each one said they wanted to live like Miss Grace. On the 10th anniversary of her passing, the family gathered at the church again. Now older, with silver in his hair and lines around his eyes, Stephen stood before the congregation. He spoke simply. I once fired 21 nannies because I thought perfection mattered. Then God sent me one woman who wasn't perfect, but who carried his presence. She taught me that success means nothing if your home is empty of love." He paused, looking at his daughters, at Clara, at the pew where Grace once sat. "She showed me what grace really means, undeserved kindness, freely given. And I intend to spend the rest of my life giving it away." He looked upward, voice soft. "Thank you, Grace, for everything." That night, as snow began to fall again, the family drove home. The mansion glowed with warmth, laughter spilling through the windows. In the garden, a small plaque stood under a magnolia tree, Grace's favorite. It read, "She came with nothing and left everything that mattered." And above it, carved in delicate script, were the words she'd once told a broken man on a crowded street. "Even the strongest heart needs peace." Inside, Emma, now grown, helped her youngest sister hang a photo on the wall. Grace smiling, a baby in each arm. Clara looked at it, tears in her eyes. "She never had children of her own," she whispered. Emma smiled softly. "She has 7. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet, steady, holy. And in that stillness, the mansion once haunted by pride stood as a living testimony that one woman, armed with nothing but faith, had rebuilt not just a home, but a heart.